right, the next group is the Ecdysozoa. They shed their external coat, which means kind of like molting. These are bilateral and coelomates, generally speaking, except for this first group, the Phylonematoda. Now, the Phylonematoda it used to be like placed at a lower level, mainly because it's a pseudocoelomate and it lacks a circulatory system. So that's kind of unusual about it, but DNA evidence has showed it to be more closely related to arthropods than previously thought. So that's why they place this group here. So it's kind of out of place because it's not really a coelomate, right? And everything above previously had been already coelomates, so it's a little less advanced. But it is these guys are called roundworms, eelworms, threadworms. Nematoda means thread form. They are non-segmented worms. They're very, very small. They can be like, microscopic to 1 meter long. They have, one-way digestive tract, separate mouth and anus with flame cells. They do have, the only thing kind of advanced about them that they have is they have head ganglia and a dorsal and a ventral nerve cord. Otherwise, they're kind of like some of the other organisms that we talked about. They have separate sexes, or they're dioecious. They have internal fertilization, which they are found in soil. A lot of times moist soil, but they are found in garden soils. Because of that, they're slightly drier environments, and so internal fertilization is an advantage. So, generally speaking, they're kind of not super advanced seeming, except for their molting aspect. There are the groups, or some examples of things that you might know are like Ascaris, which are hookworms, Trichinella, which is like a parasite of pork, and Filaria, which causes elephantiasis. So you might have heard of some of those things. Okay, so the next group is Arthropoda. This is a huge group. This means joint-footed. They are segmented, and they have many appendages associated with those segments. These are coelomates. They have an exoskeleton, a hard exoskeleton, and because of that, as they grow, it has to molt. In other words, as they grow, they will shed their outside exoskeleton and grow a new one the next year. They also exhibit metamorphosis, generally speaking, egg, larva, pupa, adult, which you probably have heard of before, perhaps in another class. And they have very diverse appendages, walking appendages, feeding appendages, sensory, copulatory. A lot of them have, all of them have eyes and some kind of olfactory organ and antenna that are part of their head. Some of their eyes are very advanced, like compound eyes of a lot of insects. And they have an open circulatory system with a heart. That means that they have a heart that pumps fluid within the body cavity called the hemocoel, or these are also called sinuses. And they have a hemolymph. A lot of them are using copper as the main pickup of the oxygen molecule instead of iron, so their color to their blood or hemolymph would be blue. All right, and they do have respiratory organs. They are, depending on what kind of environment they're in, gills, trachea. They even have something called book lungs, which are a lot like lungs. These are more land-bound organisms. Now, there are three groups. A lot of these you probably have heard of. The Chelysoformes, these guys are horseshoe crabs, spiders, ticks, scorpions. Myriapoda, which are millipedes and centipedes, and Pancrustacea, which includes Hexapoda, which is insects, or Crustacea, which are crabs, lobster, and crayfish. Now, they exhibit frequently, there's a couple of different ways that their body forms are, like for example in this insect, they have a head a thorax region and an abdomen region, and that's very common in these groups. And these guys, the Malpighian tubules are a nitrogenous waste removal organ. It's slightly different than flame cells, but basically they operate the same way, picking up nitrogenous waste and dumping them to the outside. This is just, it has to go through the exoskeleton, and it's a drier environment kind of organ. The tracheal tubes, by the way, of like a grasshopper, are basically kind of like ports of entry for the gases into the trachea, which are, you know, tubes that lead back to the body sinuses, which allow for gas exchange within the sinus cavity to the hemolymph, which is that you know, the fluid that is pumped around with the heart. They do have separate sexes, oftentimes males and females. And they generally have a head region, a cerebral ganglia, a lot of times, you know, thinking process like flying, deciding where to fly to, and etc., or jump to, depending. They do have like a separate mouth, a crop, digestive intestines, etc. All right, so another form, these are lobster, for example, which are crustacea. They have what is known as a cephalothorax. That is like the head and the thorax combined, and then the abdomen. And this is a good example of the many types of appendages that they can have. And by the way, the subphyla that we talked about, that is these guys, there's many groups, like the horseshoe crabs are a separate group, spiders are a separate group, and they're all grouped based on what kind of appendages they have. So anyway, I'll just point out some of these. They have like walking legs, they have, or they have sometimes legs that are called swimmerettes. They have little swimming appendages. They have pincers, those are for defense or, you know, threats. They have mouth parts that are part of the feeding mouth parts, antenna. So this is just, you know, some examples of that. Here's another form. This is also the cephalothorax, the head and the thorax region, and then the abdomen region is fairly separate in spiders. Again, some different appendages, the pedipalp, which is kind of to help manipulate the food, and the chelicera, which is kind of like can inject the venom for digesting their prey, or, you know, making their prey stop moving for a while, and so they literally suck out the juices of their prey while they're still alive, which is kind of nasty. Anyway, these guys also have a silk gland, spinnerets, which put out the web, so they have some unusual features to them, but basically they're, you know, set up in the same way.